The research station buzzed with activity around her, xenobiologists from 12 different species unpacking equipment, setting up monitoring stations, and casting worried glances toward the dark mountain ranges where the Velcrin prowled. "You're insane to take this assignment," muttered Commander Thex, a scarred Altarian whose own species had lost 3 diplomatic envoys to Velcrin attacks. His forearms gestured emphatically as he spoke. "The Coalition has tried everything: military force, negotiation, even pheromone manipulation. Nothing works with those beasts." Kara adjusted her field medic pack, checking the supplies of healing gel, emergency plasma, and diagnostic scanners. At 32, she had spent a decade treating wounded animals across hostile worlds, but even she felt the weight of this mission. The Velcrin weren't just predators, they were apex hunters with near-human intelligence, standing 8 feet tall with armored hides that could deflect plasma fire, retractable claws that could slice through steel, and territorial instincts so fierce that mothers would die before letting strangers near their cubs. The previous research teams made one critical mistake, Kara said, shouldering her pack. They approached the Velcrin as enemies to be conquered or problems to be solved. "I'm going to try something different." Dr. Yenth, the Coalition's lead xenopsychologist, clicked his mandibles skeptically. His insectoid features were hard to read, but his voice carried clear doubt. "And what approach is that, Dr. June? What makes you think you can succeed where seasoned diplomats and military strategists have failed?" Kara gazed toward the distant peaks where thermal scans had detected the largest Velcrin pride on the planet. Somewhere up there, cubs were learning to hunt, play, and bond with their families, just like young creatures everywhere. "I'm not going there to conquer or control them. I'm going to understand them. And maybe, if I'm patient enough and respectful enough, they'll let me help when help is needed." The assembled researchers exchanged glances that ranged from admiration to pity. The betting pools had already started. Most gave her less than a week before she'd be fleeing back to the station, if she survived at all. The Velcrin had never shown mercy to any outsider who ventured into their territory. As night fell over Orvaxis 9, Kara made her final preparations. She checked her long-range observation equipment, reviewed her behavioral analysis protocols, and carefully packed her emergency medical supplies. Unlike previous expeditions, she carried no weapons, no traps, no devices designed to subdue or capture. Her only defenses were her knowledge, her instincts, and her unwavering belief that intelligence, even predatory intelligence, could recognize genuine intent. The last transmission she sent to her sister on Earth was simple: going into the mountains tomorrow. If this works, we might just rewrite the rules of interspecies contact. If it doesn't, well, at least I'll have tried something unprecedented. Commander Thex watched her final equipment check with grudging respect. Despite his skepticism, he had to admire her courage. "What's your contingency plan if they attack?" he asked. Kara sealed her pack and looked up at the stars beginning to emerge in Orvaxis 9's darkening sky. "My contingency plan is to not give them a reason to attack. Every creature in the universe, no matter how dangerous, has something it values above all else. For the Velcrin, that's their young. I'm betting that maternal instinct might be stronger than territorial aggression." 3 weeks into her observation mission, Kara had established herself on a rocky outcropping 2 kilometers from the main Velcrin den. Through her high-powered scopes, she watched the daily rhythms of the pride with the patience of a dedicated scientist and the wonder of someone witnessing something truly extraordinary. The Velcrin were magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. The adults moved with fluid grace despite their massive size, their dark fur rippling over corded muscle as they hunted the plateau's native herbivores. But it was the cubs that captured Kara's attention completely. 5 youngsters, roughly the size of earth wolves but with the playful energy of oversized kittens, tumbled through the rocky terrain under the watchful eyes of their parents. High Alpha Nalkosh was unmistakable even from a distance. Standing nearly 9 feet tall, with scars crisscrossing his muzzle and silver threading through his black fur, he commanded absolute respect from the pride. His mate, Velandra, was sleeker but no less formidable, her amber eyes constantly scanning for threats while the cubs played nearby. Kara documented everything through her equipment, maintaining her position with religious dedication. She learned their hunting patterns, their territorial markers, their complex social hierarchies. The Velcrin communicated through a combination of subsonic growls, scent marking, and elaborate body language that spoke of sophisticated intelligence. Day 21, she whispered into her recorder as dawn broke over the mountains. The cubs are developing distinct personalities. The largest male, I'm calling him Striker, is bold to the point of recklessness. He ventures farther from the den than his siblings, testing boundaries. The smallest female, Whisper, is cautious but curious, often approaching the territorial markers to investigate new scents. Through her observations, she began to understand the tragic irony of human-Velcrin relations. Previous contact attempts had always occurred during mating season or when cubs were present, triggering the species' most aggressive protective instincts. The coalition had unknowingly been approaching them at the worst possible times, practically guaranteeing violent confrontations. Her peaceful presence hadn't gone unnoticed. Several times, she'd spotted adult Velcrin observing her from distant ridges, their keen senses undoubtedly aware of her location. But as days passed without aggressive moves from either side, a tentative détente seemed to emerge. She posed no threat, took nothing from their territory, and made no attempts to approach the den.dr. Yentha's daily check-ins grew increasingly amazed. The bedding pools have been restructured 4 times, he reported over the comma half the station thinks you've discovered some kind of pheromone camouflage. How are you managing to avoid confrontation? Respect, Kara replied simply, never taking her eyes off the cubs as they practiced pouncing on imaginary prey. I'm not trying to control their environment or change their behavior. I'm just existing alongside them, learning their language. Through observation rather than interference. But Kara knew this peaceful coexistence was fragile. She was an outsider in a world where outsiders meant danger to cubs. The real test would come if the delicate balance was disturbed, if circumstances forced her to choose between maintaining her observer status and acting on her deepest instincts as a healer and protector of the innocent. As if summoned by her thoughts, her equipment detected movement on the southern ridge. A rival pride, Shadowmoors, according to a species database, had entered Velcrin territory. These competitors were sleeker, more aggressive, and known for killing rivals' offspring to eliminate future competition. The adult Velcrin had departed. For their daily hunt just an hour earlier, the cubs were alone. Kara's hands trembled as she watched the Shadowmoor pack descend toward the undefended den through her tactical scope. 7 sleek predators, each armed with razor-sharp claws and a hunger for violence, moved with deadly purpose across the rocky terrain. The adult Velcrin were kilometers away, tracking a herd of native gazelles, completely unaware that their young were about to be slaughtered. Emergency protocol activated, she whispered into her comm, her voice tight with controlled panic. Hostile species approaching Velcrin cubs. Adult guardians absent. Requesting immediate intervention authorization. Dr. Yentha's response crackled. Through the static, negative, Dr. June. Coalition directive is clear, no interference with natural predator dynamics. You are to observe and document only. They are going to massacre 5 cubs. Kara's voice rose despite her training. Through her scope, she could see little Whisper playing near the den entrance, completely oblivious to the approaching danger. Striker was showing off for his siblings, attempting to climb a boulder twice his size. That's the ecosystem, Doctor. We cannot. Kara switched off her comm. The Shadowmoors were 300 meters from the den and closing fast. In her mind, she calculated distances, response times, and probabilities. The adult Velcrin wouldn't return for hours. By then, the cubs would be dead, and the coalition would have their documentation of natural behavior. While she lived with the memory of watching children die when she could have acted, her hands moved without conscious thought, grabbing her medical pack and emergency supplies. 3 weeks of careful observation had taught her the terrain intimately. She knew every rocky outcrop, every hidden path, every shortcut through the maze of stone formations that surrounded the den. The sprint down the mountainside was a blur of controlled falls and desperate leaps between rocks. Her lungs burned in the thin atmosphere, but adrenaline carried her forward. She reached the den complex just as the first Shadowmoor crested the final ridge, its yellow eyes locked on the plain cubs below. Hey, she screamed, standing between the predators and their targets. Hey! The lead Shadowmoor paused, momentarily confused by this strange new element in their hunting equation. Kara used those precious seconds to pull out her emergency flare gun and fire 3 bright signal flares into the sky, not as weapons, but as the loudest, most attention-grabbing display she could manage. The cubs, startled by the noise and commotion, scrambled toward the den entrance. But Whisper, the smallest and most curious, froze in place, overwhelmed by the chaos erupting around her. The Shadowmoors recovered quickly from their surprise. 7 predators against 1 human and 5 cubs, the odds were clear. They spread out in hunting formation, cutting off escape routes with practiced efficiency. Kara positioned herself directly over Whisper's trembling form, her medical scanner beeping as it detected the cub's elevated stress hormones. It's okay, little one, she whispered, even as massive predators circled them both. I've got you. The first attack came from her left, a blur of claws and fangs that she barely deflected with her equipment pack. The second struck from behind, raking claws across her shoulder and sending her stumbling forward. But she never moved away from the cubs. Through pain and terror, Kara fought with the desperate strength of someone protecting family. She used her medical tools as improvised weapons, her knowledge of anatomy to target vulnerable spots, and her voice to maintain a constant stream of reassurance to the terrified youngsters cowering beneath her. When High Alpha Nalkosh and his pride finally responded to the distant flare signals, racing across the plateau at full speed, they found something that defied every instinct and assumption their species held about outsiders. A human, blooded and exhausted, lay curled protectively around their cubs while the bodies of 3 Shadowmoors lay scattered nearby. The remaining attackers had fled when it became clear their easy prey had turned into a costly battle. Kara looked up at the massive Velcrin patriarch, expecting death. Instead, she whispered, they are safe. All 5 cubs are safe. What happened? next would be remembered across the galaxy for generations to come. High Alpha Nalkosh stood motionless above the scene, his massive frame casting shadows across the den entrance. His amber eyes, usually cold and calculating, reflected something no xenobiologist had ever documented in Velcran behavior, confusion mixed with what could only be described as wonder. Kara remained perfectly still, her arms still wrapped protectively around Little Whisper, who had stopped trembling and was now nuzzling against the human's injured shoulder. The other cubs had emerged from the den and were clustered nearby, their own eyes fixed on their father with an expression that seemed to say, "She saved us." Velandra, the cub's mother, approached cautiously, her predatory instincts warring with her maternal ones. Every genetic code in her body screamed that this outsider represented danger, yet the evidence before her eyes told a different story entirely. This strange, fragile creature had fought 7 Shadowmaws to protect her young, something that should have been impossible for such a small, clawless being. Status report. Dr. Yentha's voice crackled from Kara's dropped communicator. Dr. June, respond immediately. We detected combat signatures, and Nalkosh's attention shifted to the tiny device, his acute hearing picking up the alien voices. For a moment, Kara thought he might destroy the communicator, severing her connection to the outside world. Instead, he listened intently, as if trying to understand this new element in an already unprecedented situation. I'm alive, Kara whispered into the comm, not daring to move suddenly with 8-foot predators surrounding her. The cubs are safe. I repeat, all cubs are secure. The silence that followed was deafening, both from the communicator and from the Coalition station kilometers away, where every species representative was struggling to process what they'd just heard. Slowly, deliberately, High Alpha Nalkosh lowered his massive head until his scarred muzzle was inches from Kara's face. She could feel his breath, warm and carrying the scent of the hunt, as he studied her with an intelligence that was startlingly, unmistakably sentient. Then he did something that rewrote every textbook on Velcran behavior. He gently nudged her injured shoulder with his nose, the same gesture he used to check on his own cubs when they were hurt. By the 7 moons, breathed Commander Thex through the communicator, his voice filled with awe. Are we seeing what I think we are seeing? Velandra approached next, and after a moment's hesitation, began carefully licking Kara's wounds, the same grooming behavior she used to tend to her cubs' injuries. The antiseptic properties of Velcran saliva, designed by evolution to prevent infection in the young, immediately began soothing Kara's cuts and reducing inflammation. Striker, the boldest of the cubs, was the first to actually touch the human, placing one massive paw on her leg in what could only be interpreted as gratitude. Soon, all 5 cubs were pressed against her, purring with the subsonic rumbles that indicated contentment and safety. The scene being transmitted back to the research station was causing chaos among the Coalition representatives. Dr. Yentha's mandibles clicked rapidly as he processed data that challenged every assumption about predator-prey relationships. Commander Thex found himself speechless for the first time in his military career. Even the AI systems were flagging the behavioral readings as unprecedented and requiring immediate xenobiological review. This is impossible, whispered Dr. Sethel, the Coalition's chief behaviorist. Velcran don't adopt outsiders. They don't show protective behavior toward other species. Every model we have says this shouldn't be happening. But it was happening. High Alpha Nalkosh stood guard while his mate tended to the human's wounds. The cubs treated Kara not as an intruder or prey, but as a member of their family unit. When she finally attempted to stand, Whisper whimpered in distress, not wanting her protector to leave. The implications rippled outward like shockwaves. If Velcrin could form bonds with humans, if they could recognize and reward self-sacrifice on behalf of their young, then every military strategy, every diplomatic protocol, and every assumption about hostile species would need to be reconsidered. As the sun set over Orvaxis 9, painting the sky in brilliant purples and golds, Kara found herself in the impossible position of being the first human to witness Velcrin family behavior from the inside. She watched the evening feeding, where Nalkosh brought food not just for his mate and cubs, but placed a portion near her as well. She was no longer an observer, she was family. Asterisk.